If you're anything like me, you've probably spent a fair amount of time on Twitter recently. And if you have, you would have seen lots of disturbing videos go viral of people mostly negatively interacting with the police. Police brutality, police violence, really painful, harsh words being said. And ultimately, it's hard to track. There's so many. I find it overwhelming. But one thing that I discovered this week is that actually one Twitter user, a man named Greg Douchette, actually took it upon himself to create a master spreadsheet which records every instance that he could find where an incident with police which resulted in some kind of violence or brutality was recorded. The spreadsheet is an amazing amount of work, and it's public. It's a Google Docs spreadsheet. Anyone can go and add to it and understand it and use it in order to understand what's going on. As of right now, there are 631 entries on the sheet, and more are being entered all the time, sadly. That's scary, actually. And it's provoked a worldwide conversation about what role police should play in our societies. Notably, the city of Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered, announced they will be defunding the police department, reshaping what policing looks like in the city, rebuilding it actually from the ground up. Perhaps they might ask, when we have the chance to consider policing from scratch, what should policing look like? That's the question on the table. What should policing look like when we have the opportunity, which we really haven't had for quite some time, to design it from absolutely nothing? Well, as usual, the Torah has some answers, although the best advice the Torah has to this question is that we should shave all of the police officers. Yes, shave them. The reason I say that is because in our parasha this week, Parashat B'ha-alot'kha, one of the things we read about is the purification and preparation of the Levites for their service. It says in the context of describing the ritual, "This is what you shall do to cleanse the Levites. Sprinkle them with the waters of purification, and go over their entire body with a razor, and wash their clothes, and thus they shall be cleansed." This is pretty remarkable, actually, because the Torah is usually pretty against shaving, particularly the beard, and the ever-ambiguous corners of the face. What changed that here, the Torah is suggesting that the Levites, in order to be consecrated to the service that they do, and we'll talk about what that is, they have to be shaved. All parts of their body. Everything. From eyebrows to toes. Shaved. It seems like that must be a really significant symbol, and I think it is. And we should consider how this bizarre initiatory ritual corresponds to the responsibilities of the Levites. So, we have to think, who are the Levites? What do they do? Well, to start with, they're one of the 12 tribes. They're the descendants of Levi, one of Jacob's sons. But they're also marked out as different more or less right away. That's largely because Moses and Aaron and Miriam are Levites, which propels the tribe to the center of power among the Israelite confederacy, leaving Egypt. As the Torah develops, this tribe of Levi becomes absolutely central to the religious innovations of biblical Judaism. The tribe ultimately becomes divided into two parts. One, the much smaller part, the direct descendants of Aaron himself, become known as the Kohanim, the priests. And the other is all the remaining members of the tribe of Levi who are not Kohanim, who retain the generic title of Leviim, or Levites, as we call them in English. So between the Kohanim and the Leviim, the entire tribe of Levi is marked out for special service. The Kohanim, it's clear, they're responsible for the sacrifices in the temple. They have a very important role to play. They're kept very separate from society as a whole. They live and eat and operate entirely within the temple precinct, and that's their special responsibility. But what's less clear is what the Leviim are meant to be doing. They're also marked out in various social policies. They don't have any income, they can't really own any property, they only take their sustenance from the donations to the temple, nor can they own any agricultural land. They're only allowed to live in certain cities that are designated special for them. They live on the donations of the rest of the people. everyone else who's designated Israel, representing the other 11 tribes. Probably these regulations are meant to keep them from accruing too much power. That's obviously a concern because they're already given so much spiritual power. The Torah doesn't want them to have physical, material, or economic power as well. But of course it's a lot more complicated. That's because the non-Kohanim Levi'im, the Levites as we know them, they're more than just backup priests. They're also the soldiers, the policemen, the enforcers, and the guardians of the temple compound. The Levites are designated from the beginning as a semi-religious military order who are responsible for ensuring the priestly service is maintained, and also, importantly, that social order is preserved. They're a lot more like the Praetorian Guard or the Knights Templar than they are simply servants in the temple. There's not a lot of concrete evidence historically or archaeologically about what exactly the Levites did, but it's clear from the text of the Torah that they were meant to serve as a police force, a sort of Praetorian Guard protecting the temple. And they also, according to the rabbis, acted as bailiffs and probation officers for criminals. They represented judges in the judicial system and executed the orders of courts on their behalf. They also evidently acted as watchmen in cities and patrolled the borders of countrysides. And according to some texts, they also were the executioners in capital cases in the courts. So more or less, what that conveys to us is something akin to a police force, a armed order of individuals who are designated by their responsibility to protect society, prevent crime, and enforce justice. So, why do they need to be shaved? Well, predictably, the commentators mostly avoid this question, suggesting that it's because the Levites are replacing the original plan for a holy order, which was meant to be the firstborn of every family. That doesn't really add up, though. Interestingly, one of the only places that I found a commentary on this precise question that seems to make sense is the Zohar, which, as some of you will know, doesn't often make sense. The Zohar is a really interesting read on this strange ritual. And what it suggests is that actually there's two powers in the world, two spiritual things which form a binary. One of them is Gevurah, which is might or power or kind of harshness. And the other one is Chesed, which is love and mercy and compassion. And the Zohar often imagines things along this binary, and it's a spectrum. There's lots of things in between. But the goal is so much often for balance. And when the Zohar comes to comment on this verse, it says, the Levites, they come from the side of judgment, of Gevurah, of might. Thus they're not purified until their hair is removed by the priests who represent Chesed. That way they can elevate them. Now what I really think that means is that they can balance them and actually counterbalance them. Because the suggestion of the Zohar, and you can see this in commentaries on it, is that the Levites are so closely associated because of their role as a police force with Gevurah, with might and power and harshness. Because of their responsibility, they are associated with one extreme side of that spectrum. And so the Torah suggests a ritual which is meant to bring them closer to an equilibrium. By shaving their entire body, not only is there a certain degree of humiliation, especially for a culture that was very weird about hair, but there's also a symbolic power to that, because the times in which your body is actually hairless, really very few, and the closest are those extremes of life, birth and death. And so in some way this ritual actually marks out that the Levites are needing to counterbalance their Gevurah, their harshness, with a really powerful gesture of mercy and compassion, by making them akin to a newborn, and by making them understand that they are being remade when they become Levites. They are taking on a new and different responsibility. The balance of Gevurah and Chesed is critical to the Kabbalistic worldview that the Zohar represents. Love and mercy on one side, power and might and violence on the other. But it's the balance of them that makes for spiritual flourishing. It's balance that's needed. And because the Levites are so far to one side, towards order and control and violence, they need that counterbalance to bring them towards mercy and compassion. Right now, we're discussing what this means to defund the police. Minneapolis has been the first, but there will be more. And there's a big discussion taking place around what exactly the role of police officers or peace officers is meant to be in our society. Obviously, we have a goal of safety and protection for all of our citizens. But as is also obvious, that mandate has not been met in many cities and in many cases, not only in the recent past, but for a long time. On the other hand, we cannot do without any form of law enforcement. We need something. It would be foolish to think we can do away with police entirely as an entity. Rather, we need to aim for that equilibrium. But it's not a neutral equilibrium. Because we're starting out with the police, like the Levites, tending towards Gevurah, by virtue of their role and responsibility, they tend towards might and power. Since they're charged with the holy responsibility of protecting, and they skew so much to the side of might, we need to combat that, to protect the balance, by doubling down on mercy. Only with mercy and might mixed do we gain the ideal of the Torah, the Levite as a holy guardian, protecting the innocent, defending the righteous, and ensuring a safer society for all. Right now, we're a long way from that. But the Torah gives us some ideas of how we can begin to move towards greater equilibrium in a role that's so critical to our society. Although perhaps, in our own experience, we can do so without the shaving. Shabbat Shalom.